Okay, here's part two of choosing the shot. In the early days of comics, creators used a method that was utilized in film of the 1930s, where the camera was pretty much set in one place and then the actors performed in front of the camera. The reason for this is it was too difficult to re-stage a camera placement, and in the early days of sound, they had to hide microphones on the set. So the actors had to pretty much stay around a plant or a table or something where the microphone was hidden. So oftentimes, the shot would be very much straight on, and usually either a full shot or a medium shot, and it wouldn't vary. They wouldn't do different camera angles, wouldn't do close-ups, and that was a necessity thing. Early comics reflected that. Take a look at this page here. This is an early Superman. I believe it's a comic strip, but it still utilizes the same example. We have here what should be a pretty fascinating story. Adolf Hitler, Nazi Party, World War II, actually dresses up in a Superman costume for this one. And yet, despite that, the generic placement of the characters kind of makes this a little on the boring side, at least visually. So just look, the majority of the shots here are medium waist-up shots, and the closest thing we get to a close-up is the one of Superman where he says, "I'm afraid I do." So by not varying the shots, by keeping it very much the horizon line in the same place, the characters just moving on that same plane, and the camera essentially staying in one place, we have a really generic and pedestrian way of telling a story. Now, comic book artists did that until films really pushed the envelope in terms of how they could tell a story. But we'll get to more of that in another second. So as you're laying out your panel compositions, you want to think about where you stage your characters. Now, in this particular one, this is one where the horizon line, that's the eye line of the viewer. If you picture a panel as being a composition done with a camera, it's the line at which the viewer's eye sees the image. This one, the horizon line, is pretty much right in the middle, but the one thing that we did do is we staged these characters in a more interesting way than just two characters standing side by side, as in the Superman example. And in this case, character A in the red shirt is closer to the viewer, character B is further away, back towards the wall. If you look at the chart down at the bottom of the image, you can see that basically character A is closer to the viewer than character B. The reader knows this, and he knows he's not a giant character because the lines around the character are so much thicker and heavier than the lines around the character in the background. So that's really important to make sure that your reader gets it, understood, because we are talking comics here, where it's not outside the realm of possibility that a giant walks into a room, that they get that this character is just closer to us. And again, staging like this, where we have overlap. One character, if you look at the red shirt, it overlaps, his shoulder overlaps the character in the background. That makes it a much more natural sort of image. So you want to make it that way so it's not so stiff, right? So that definitely helps. Now, comic book artists and cinematographers, for that matter, really began to look at what could be done with film and with comics in a different way when Citizen Kane came about in 1941. Directed by Orson Welles and done with his team from the Mercury Theater on the Air, including some cinematographers who were not afraid to push the envelope. Welles did some things that nobody had done before, and comic book artists of the day, they actually went and saw this movie over and over and over again. In a conversation I had with Jerry Robinson, who was Bob Kane's chief assistant. Bob Kane created Batman. Robinson told me that he and his fellow artists would go and spend an entire day watching Citizen Kane in the theater with their sketchbooks, and they would draw angles and shadows and compositions right from the film. And you can see the change in the comic book industry shortly after this movie becomes popular. Now, what are some of the things that Welles did that is really so unique? Well, first off, he moved the eye line down very low. So when you look at this, it's extremely clever. The eye line is low and it's slightly crooked. So we're in a room with an angle. If you look, the center point of this and the center point is almost always the center of your panel, is Wells. He also did a few things that really make it stand out. Wells is the only character dressed all in white. The rest of the characters are in black or in dark colors. That makes him pop right off of the image. So instantly, as a viewer, our eye goes to him. Also, in this composition, in this scene, the trophy is the only thing in the room that is actually straight in terms of our view. It's in reality held at an extreme angle, but because the camera's been tilted, it appears straight. And that also makes it stand out so that we as a viewer, and if this was a comic book, we as a reader, we would notice Wells right away, and we would notice that trophy right away. And just to reiterate that, he also has all of the characters in the scene either looking at Wells or looking at the trophy. So it doubly implies what the importance in this particular scene is. So the white character, the dark background, and the attention of the characters gets us as a reader or a viewer to look in the right place. And controlling where the reader looks in comics, that's a really critical part of this. And that's all about choosing your shot. So think about the way this is done. It's a really clever way of pushing beyond the norm or the generic. In this particular shot, he took the eye line and he moved it way up. Basically, as a viewer, our eye line is about at Wells' hat. Wells, in this case, is dressed mostly in dark colors, but he's on a light background. He's actually standing on bundles and bundles of newspapers to imply the fact that he's a newspaper giant. He's a publisher of papers. He's a man of power. And he falls dead center in our focal point, and it's nicely composed. It's also somewhat symbolic and almost abstract. There's likely not a time that any publisher of a newspaper ever stands on bundles of newspapers, but this is symbolic to get across to the viewer or the reader that he is a powerful newspaper man. This particular shot later on in the film, Wells runs for office, and this is a nice, again, angle. The eye line is low and angled, and the periphery follows the position of the character. He's making a big speech, and behind him is a giant portrait of himself. Nothing could possibly say, I am a hugely powerful, influential politician, than having a giant poster of yourself set behind him. So it's a brilliantly composed shot, and it's, again, think about the more generic way this might be handled, where it would be straight, we'd see a character at a podium, there might be a vote for whomever sign in the back, but this is so much more powerful. So again, by pushing the visuals, by really thinking it through, and I'd argue that oftentimes, as a comic book artist, you do a draft, you do an idea for a panel, and then do it again. The second or third draft is often better. This one here, also from the same film. Really interesting composition. We have two characters who are looking over the vast wealth and collection of Wells' character. And they're set off over to the left. They're in dark suits, so they stand out a little bit more. There are other characters in gray suits, but they're the only ones in black. And that is so that they will pop off the somewhat lighter background. The big opulent staircase shows the wealth of the Wells character over to the right, and almost in a cluster so much that you don't even notice it. You have other characters going through all these artifacts that are from Wells' collection. Wells, over the years, had amassed this amazing collection of art in the film. And this is to show us the opulence and the magnificence of Wells' collection. You can see further behind all the characters, there are crates, unopened crates in the back. That indicates to us that it houses Wells' other artifacts. The character on the stairs, I think, is a nice touch. He mimics the statues across from him. So he's a photographer getting ready to take a picture, but he actually looks like he belongs there. He looks like one of the statues on the staircase. All right, more in a minute.